Okay, so we're in place. So good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everybody, wherever you're joining us from. Welcome to Data Platform Down Under. So on behalf of myself and Martin Catherall, my co-host, today's session and our last session for 2024 is I Got the Role, Now What? Our speaker, Cindy Gross, who joins us from, Cindy, are you in Seattle or Redmond?
I'm in Issaquah, so just outside of
Issaquah, just
Seattle,
outside.
south of Redmond.
There we go. So giving up her time to talk to us about I Got the Role, Now What? This session is being recorded and will be made available on the Data Platform Down Under YouTube channel once the session has finished. If you haven't already subscribed to our YouTube channel, feel free. You can come back and watch any of the sessions that we have been hosting and running for the last couple of years. If you don't already have that, we will put that into the chat window so that you can join up. If you do have any questions during the session, put them in the chat window. Just put a big Q or raise your hand. But myself and Martin will be monitoring the chat window and we'll be able to ask those questions for you too, Cindy, throughout the session. Or Cindy, would you prefer them to be held to the end of the session?
Throughout's fine.
Throughout's fine. Okay, so with that, I'm going to stop sharing and hand over to Cindy to take us through today's session.
Thank you. I really appreciate you inviting me here. And I know this is a little bit different format than the deep technical talks that you're used to, that I used to give and attend all the time. So one of the habits that I tried to break when I was still at Microsoft, but have definitely made much effort at breaking, is just a nonstop fire hose of information. So this is more relaxed. It's a little bit slower paced. There will be opportunities for you to interact, and I strongly encourage you to do so. The material is much more meaningful if we're interacting with each other. And if you're able to come on video to answer the questions, that's great. I understand if you don't want to, but if you can at least unmute and or respond in the chat, because it is more meaningful when we're talking about it together. One of the ways that we come together and build relationships is to have discussions, whereas much of the tech industry is really built on the idea of taking turns telling other people how smart you are. And that doesn't really lead to a lot of innovation. It doesn't really lead to a lot of good relationship building. So in my current role, I am all about relationships and empathy and kindness and having people spend more time talking. So it's really a lot about slowing down and doing things differently than my 25 years in the tech industry taught me to do things. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my slides. And while I'm doing that, is there anybody that has expectations about what you want to get out of today? You heard the title. Maybe you're, you have a specific question. Who wants to tell me what you want to make sure I cover during this talk? Don't be shy.
I was just going to say, stone cold silence. So, look, I guess for me, I guess it's a little bit different for me in that I work for myself. So I technically haven't done an interview for I don't know how long. But then working as a consultant, I also look at it that I have to go for interviews all the time because the client needs to hire myself. And there's a couple of us on here that are that. So for me, yeah, I guess this can be a little bit of a change in approach from that side of things. So if anybody else wants to share, then feel free to come off of mute and turn your camera on.
Thank you. Well, if nobody else wants to share, I'll share what oh, please go ahead, Genevieve.
So I think I've just been on the chat as well. So I just love to go and like any guidance, framework, or roadmap, to prepare myself better. That would be ideal, personally.
I'm having a little trouble hearing you. It sounds a little echoey. Is it just me?
I think my mic is just bad. So it's on the chat though.
Okay. Thank you. You just got the role and you don't know what to do, so guidance, framework, roadmap. Okay. Got that. Anyone else? Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and get started then. Feel free to either type something in the chat or come off of mute and ask a question. If I don't notice that that you've come off mute, feel free to interrupt me and just say what you need to say. So I'll get a little bit more into introductions and who I am in a little bit, but there's some basic information here on the screen. I am a coach most of the time. So PCC is a level of certification that I've received from the International Coaching Federation. I also do training, speaking, and consulting on leadership and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And there's a QR code there that will take you to my website and some downloads and things like that. And that slide will also be up at the end. My business is befriendingdragons.com. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So today we're going to talk about I got the role, now what? So, a lot of times we fight for something, or maybe we just land in something unexpectedly and then we don't know what to do. So one of the things I really like about this photo I have here is the photographer was trying to get me to swirl the cloak, and I kept going like this, and it just, to me, I look completely unprepared and trying to do something and then also not knowing what I'm doing. So I thought that was an appropriate start to the talk. Anybody else have any things that maybe a feeling or a thought or some image you have that reminds you of that sense of I don't quite know what I'm doing that you want to share with the group? Or not, that's fine as well. All right. So we're going to go over some community agreements, which is one thing that I strongly suggest when you're in a role, you kind of figure out what the community agreements, the usually implied agreements are about the relationships among the group. So we'll talk about that. A little bit more about why we're here today, what's going to be different as we go forward into a new role as opposed to what we've done in the past. And the format I'm using is what's called a Monday toolkit. And if any of you know Pamela Hood, it was actually her idea at a talk I gave. She said, what everybody needs is a Monday toolkit. So I've got a practical tip on every slide of what you can take forward and use when you start back to work next Monday or whatever day you next return to work. Then we'll do a reflection and have time for questions. So first of all, I want to start off with one of my community agreements, which is that we operate with a sense of Gadugi. I am Cherokee, which is the largest Native American tribe in the United States, and I'm also Delaware. And our original culture, the Cherokee, we call ourselves Salagi. And the colonizer word for that became Cherokee. The Lenape became Delaware because one of the colonizers gave his individual name to both a state in the United States and many of the people that had lived in Delaware, New Jersey, those areas. So where Wall Street is now, I think even outside the United States, you hear references to Wall Street, which is where all the big banks and investment firms are. There was a wall built to keep out the invaders, and that was mostly the Lenape and the Dutch. So my ancestors are at least partially responsible for why there was a wall built in Manhattan and where the name of all those banks come from. Going back to the sense of Gadugi, Gadugi is a Salagi or a Cherokee word that means to come together as one and work towards a shared purpose. And so when we think about what we're doing here in this room today, I want us to operate with Gadugi. We're not here to fight. We're not here to argue about one way is better than another way. It's about a discussion of here are some other ways we can be in the world. And that's a good thing to carry forward into your relationships you're building when you go into a new role, whether it's a promotion or a change of some sort. Maybe you're in a completely new company, in a new org, maybe you have a new manager, but you're in the same role. It's really about figuring out how we as the people in the room come together and work towards a shared purpose. And as we do that, we figure out what our community agreements are. Quite often, these are hidden from us and they're assumed. And the person with the most power in the room will decide what to do when somebody's late for a meeting, what to do when somebody talks over somebody else, what to do when somebody's interrupted, what to do when somebody sits quietly in the back of the room and never gets a chance to talk. Those are all implied community agreements. I encourage you as a leader, with a formal title or not, to set these community agreements or group boundaries or whatever you want to call them more explicitly, like really define, hey, I just saw that when the VP walked in 5 minutes late, we started the meeting over. But when the new person walked in 5 minutes late, we didn't say a word and we just let them sit in the back of the room, not even at the table. What do we want to do going forward? Let's come up with a community agreement or a group boundary around what we want to do and get it out in the open. And so that's a way of using Gadoogie, and it's also just a way of coming up with community agreements in general. And it is becoming common here in the western part of Canada and the United States to do a land acknowledgement. A land acknowledgement is where we look at the Indigenous peoples who occupied the land before colonization, whichever waves of colonization have occurred, and who was here before the current people were here. Like I said, I'm Cherokee and Delaware. Mostly from the eastern part of the United States originally. And my charge or call to action for you is to remember that Native people are still here. We still suffer from systemic oppression, and we're still loving, laughing, and thriving. We are here today, which is actually the biggest problem that in the United States tribes face, is that people don't realize that Cherokee and Navajo and Osage and Mohawk, that all these people still exist. We're not the same. And we do have our own traditions and cultures and things to teach the rest of the world. And I am sure that is true where you are at as well. So any questions on community agreements or group boundaries? Quiet bunch today.
So Cindy, I was just going to say, at the moment, most of that's being focused more in the work setting. What about from a social setting, like at an event as an organizer?
Yeah. So when we're looking at events, whether they're formal events or whether they're gatherings of friends, again, it is often the implied agreements that take over. So events really need to have strong codes of conduct, and the codes of conduct are one way of having a group boundary. So you can say, here's what happened if somebody thinks they're being harassed, for example. One of the reasons that I love Geek Girl Con here in Seattle is that they explicitly say, if you suspect that somebody did an upskirt picture, like a camera on the ground to get up underneath somebody's skirt, if somebody takes a picture of you without asking first, if somebody comments on your weight, that you're too skinny, you're too fat, you're, whatever it might be, if somebody comments on somebody being transgender, if somebody, whatever it might be, if you do something that harms another person or a group of people, you're out. Like, no questions asked, you're out. And that is one of the reasons that you can go to Geek Girl Con and you will see people dressed in everything from a t-shirt celebrating their fandom to full on, down to the detail cosplay where they have recreated what's on the screen and everything in between. And you just get this constant, oh my gosh, you look so great. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad to be here. And then the comments afterwards are very focused on how good it felt to be there. Whereas a lot of other Comic-Cons I've been to, it's about, who could show that they knew the most trivia. I remember going to a Star Trek convention and I just started feeling totally lost because everybody's like, well, wait, do you remember in the original series in episode, 13, where they talked about this and that this actor was in it? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't remember, right? Like, it was about exclusion instead of inclusion. So you still need to find this shared purpose, but with an event, it's quite often the event organizers doing it without fully bringing in the whole community. You can't bring in 1,000 people or 5,000 people and say, do you all one by one agree? But what you can do is lay that out as part of the admission to the event, if it's a paid event, or as just part of your group culture, if it's a group of friends or a smaller group of people. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, so, I was in the tech industry for 25 years, most of that working on SQL Server. When Twitter first started, I grabbed the SQL Cindy Twitter handle, and that's the way a lot of people knew me for a really long time. And, I'm no longer on Twitter, another casualty of modern life. And, it's sad for me to think about all I lost when I left Microsoft, or even when I stopped working on SQL Server so much and I started doing big data. And then after I was harassed on one of the data teams, I went over to the Windows team to try to get to a group where there was no one I knew. I mean, it was literally one of my requirements because I had heard too many comments in neighboring offices and walking down the hall about how I'd done something wrong, both by being harassed and by reporting the harassment. And they did find the guy who did it guilty of violating Microsoft's anti-harassment policy. They did everything that they were legally and ethically required to do, and it just wasn't enough to keep me in the tech industry. And, a part of that self-examination as I went along was trying to figure out, what was I excited about? I could no longer get excited about writing T-SQL code. I could no longer get excited about doing performance tuning or clustering. I wrote chapters in a couple of SQL Server books about clustering. Didn't care about clustering anymore. So I had to figure out what I did care about. And that's something that a lot of people that I work with face, that whole sense of who am I now? And that also can come when you get a new role. You get promoted from an individual contributor to a manager. You go from a manager of individual contributors to a manager of managers. You go to, some fancy title. And all of a sudden you have to figure out who you are again. Who am I? What do I do? I've got this role I've been fighting for. And now what? What do I do? And so a lot of the work that I do with clients is about how you find your why, how you find your purpose, and who you actually are at your core. And what I found was once I figured out that my purpose was really about bringing justice and fairness to people who are facing issues because of their identity in the tech industry, I became confident, relaxed. I started surrounding myself with people that I like, that I chose. Whereas a lot of time in the tech industry, I was constantly dealing with comments that made me not like the people that were making these negative comments about me or about people that I liked or people who were like me. The number of times I was told, well, you're not like the other women. You're smart. You're technical. Or the times I was told that I was not technical enough. Despite being the one that even the people that were saying that would come to with their SQL Server or big data questions. So I decided to take myself out of that environment and put myself in a community with people that I really like, that I admire, that are doing work that I enjoy. And part of that is prioritizing myself and my health. So when you land in a new role, a lot of times you'll end up doubling your workload. You'll end up, cutting off your friends. You'll end up eating really unhealthy. When I went through the SQL MCM training at the time, the SQL Masters training, I don't know how many people even still knows what that is. But the time that I went through it, it was, 3 weeks where you went to class every day, for it felt like 12 hours. It probably wasn't. It was really hard to get into the class. You had to really work hard to even get into the MCM class. And then you had to take a test at the end of each week and you had to study. And, we had study groups. I'm like, why? Why was this a requirement to be considered somebody that was very technically skilled at my job? I was already technically skilled, or I would not have been in the SQL MCM training. And then, you had to do a 6-hour lab at the end in order to prove that you could actually put in place what you were doing. And again, it felt in many ways like it was just a stress test. I was not prioritizing my health. But I will tell you, during that 3 weeks that I spent, at the time I didn't live in Seattle. So, I had a hotel for 3 weeks. And I exercised every day. I tried to eat healthy every day. And you need to do that when you get into a new role, because it's so easy to say, I'm just going to eat the snacks. I'm just going to, go down to the soda dispenser and have a soda because I need to stay awake. I need the caffeine. Well, maybe that's not what you need. Maybe you need to prioritize your physical and your mental health. You need to have somebody to talk to. You need to be able to have time to relax, whether that's reading a book, playing games, whatever it might be that helps you relax and get reconnected to your community. One thing that I really still have to work on is being kind to myself. So many of us are unkind to ourselves, partly because other people are unkind to us. We're constantly being pushed. People are saying, well, I'm trying to make you better. It's not other people's job to make us better. Even if they're my manager, even if they're my trainer or my coach, it is my job to take care of myself. It is my job to decide in what ways I want to grow. It's my job to decide what I want to do. So one of the key tenets of coaching is that every person is whole, capable, resourceful, and creative. And that means I don't get to make a single decision for anybody else. I don't get to tell anybody else what to do. Now, as a manager, you're giving people direction, you're telling them what to do from a work perspective. But if you're trying to manage every aspect of their life, you're either micromanaging them or you're bullying them. And that's not healthy for anyone involved. So I've learned to be kind and curious with myself and others. I really stick to my values, my purpose, and my sense of self. And really, it's about constantly asking myself, how will I set my dragons free today, which I will talk more about in a couple slides. Any questions?
Nothing in the chat.
Okay, thank you. All right, so you got the role, but you're uncomfortable. You feel maybe like you're an imposter in some way. Maybe you're gaslighting yourself, or maybe you're projecting onto others and gaslighting them. Maybe there's some self-doubt. Maybe you're not feeling very joyful. And maybe the relationships aren't working. So when you were in your old role, you had a way that you talked to other people, a way that you'd worked out, whether intentionally or whether it just happened, that you knew how to get what you wanted done. You knew how to ask for things. And that doesn't necessarily work. You get moved to a position with a different level of authority, and now you have to be more or less direct. You have to be more or less authoritative in how you say things to other people. You have a different amount of time available to you. So one of the things I've heard from people that go from being a manager of individual contributors to being a director or a VP is that all of a sudden they have to go against their natural style and start giving people 10 seconds instead of 10 minutes, giving people very directive answers because they don't have time for anything else. And you have to figure that out. You have to figure out, what does it do to my relationships when I am now in charge of things and telling people to do things, when earlier we were deciding collaboratively how to do things, when earlier I could spend 30 minutes or an hour with somebody discussing, I don't know, what do you think? Well, here's what I think. Let's come up with this. Let's come to consensus. And now you have to say, look, this has to be done a certain way. Maybe you give them 2 or 3 choices, but you don't get to spend a lot of time with them on exactly how it's going to be done. And also you have a different view of the system. I don't know if any of you have heard the analogy of an elephant. So if a bunch of people are blindfolded and they're put around an elephant, somebody who's feeling the tail will say, oh, there's a rope. And somebody who is feeling the side of the elephant will say, oh, look, there's this big hanging, this tapestry on the wall. And somebody who's down by the feet will say, oh, there's this, really hard, rocks or something on the ground. So the view you have of the system is different depending on where you're at. So now all of a sudden you've got all these new views of the system, and you may have been saying for years, oh, it's so stupid when people do this thing. And now you're like, oh, I can see now why we have the ICs do these things, or why we as a company are headed in this direction. And now you have to readjust everything around these different parts of the system that you see. I've worked with some women in manufacturing who are working on the floor at plants making auto parts or air conditioning parts or whatever it may be. And they were union members. And when they got promoted to supervisor or manager positions, all of a sudden they're not in the union. They have to explicitly be doing things that are things that when they were in the union, they would have been against. And now it's their responsibility to do those things. So what do you do in those situations? So that's where your practiced approaches aren't working. And so now what do you do? Any questions on that or anything you want to add? All right, so here's an exercise. I'd love to have you all come on at least audio and preferably video once we're done with this and have an answer for me. Please, please, please at least put it in the chat because this is a part where it really is useful to hear other people's perspective. So we're going to go through an exercise and I'm going to give you an example first. And this will also talk about why I have the business name that I do. So what we're going to do in the exercise is help you create a visualization to help you through this change. So you'll think of something you want to do differently or experience differently. You'll pick some sort of symbol, and then you're going to visualize the change using the symbol. So for me, I think about when I was diagnosed with breast cancer 10 years ago. I was ready to head out on my bicycle, go for a mountain bike ride. And I got a phone call from the doctor and he said, you have breast cancer, don't worry, it'll be gone in 6 weeks. And it was. So thank goodness for modern medical science. But what it started was this process of dealing with emotions I hadn't dealt with. My mom had been diagnosed with breast cancer 20 years earlier. She eventually passed away from that. And I had suppressed it. I had pushed it down. I had kept my dragon small and trapped inside my chest. So the fear, the anxiety, the stress, all of these dragons, along with the hope dragon and the dream dragon and a lot of experiences I could have had, I kept myself small by keeping those dragons small in my chest. And so with that breast cancer diagnosis, I learned to think about letting my dragon free, letting my dragon fly through the air so I'd have new perspectives, letting my dragon show up in a way that let me, instead of fighting the dragons inside and keeping them small, I thought about how do I set the dragons free every day. And so my visualization here, my symbol is the dragon, and the change I want to have is from a dragon that's trapped inside to a dragon that's flying free. So what I'd like for you to do is spend about a minute thinking about this. What is something about having a new role, whether it's moving to a new client as a consultant, maybe taking on a new type of consulting work, you've been promoted or demoted or laid off, you've got a new job, whatever it may be, or pick some totally different experience. Pick, taking your kids to the playground, whatever it might be. What do you want to experience differently? Pick a symbol, like for me, it was the dragon, and then visualize the change using your symbol. So I'm going to put 1 minute on the clock and go ahead and think through that. Let's go. "15 seconds. All right, that was 1 minute. Who wants to share what you want to experience differently through the frame of your symbol?
think everyone's afraid to go first.
Kelly, thank you for volunteering. I think you're volunteering.
Volunteering, so good. I'm a consultant, so I'm one of these people like Warwick who changes clients quite frequently. And the first thing that came to my mind during that exercise was actually in Australia, our biggest eagle is a wedge-tailed eagle, but you could probably associate it with any eagle. So sort of coming in, soaring over the top, worrying about strategy, not so much the details on the ground, but then when I need to sort of swoop down for the details, I can. And yeah, sort of very graceful, very strong animals. So that's sort of where I want and what I want new jobs to feel like and stuff like that. So yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's a very powerful image to have a very specific, in this case, an animal that you chose. You have an action associated with it, and you listed the characteristics. You said strong. What were the other characteristics you said?
Strong, like I said, sort of high level, but can dive into the details when needed, and also you can't miss them. You can't sort of. There's an eagle in the sky, you're going to see it. So
Right. Yeah. So tell me if you can something about the power of the image. Like what do you see the image being able to help you do?
I think using it to sort of step back, and I find when I go into new clients, I do dive into the details too quickly, and then you don't see the bigger picture and the bigger solution. So I think that whole just thinking about the eagle makes you think sort of further back and all that sorts of stuff with every interaction and every engagement.
Yeah, thank you. Is there something that you can use to remind yourself of the eagle before you go into a new engagement or maybe even a difficult meeting?
It's a good idea. I hadn't really thought of it, but I've got some photos from a recent holiday I went on where we found some eagles in the wild, so I can always have something pinned behind my desk, um, or something that I can see as I'm about to go into a meeting.
Yeah. Yeah, and having a visual, or for some people, it's a reminder, like you said, an alarm once a week, or a reminder once a week to have a meditation question related to it, or journal question, or whatever mindfulness practice you might have related to the eagle. So, what might be a question you could ask yourself?
Um, am I showing the grace and the strength that I like in eagles when I'm interacting with someone or when I'm approaching something?
Yeah.
I
So,
think that'll
one
work.
suggestion you might have is to say, "How am I?" as opposed to "Am I?" An
Oh,
open question. Thank you. That was a very powerful and an excellent example. Thank you for stepping
that's
up
it.
and exhibiting the power of the exercise. I appreciate it.
That's
It
figured when
anything
people don't do that often.
Yeah. Anything you want to say about the experience of going through the exercise or speaking first or anything?
It's never as scary as you think it is once you've actually spoken. Um, so I think a lot of people build up how scary it's going to be before they press that unmute button, but it's really not actually that scary.
Yeah, thanks. Any questions for me?
No, I really liked it. I thought that was a really quick and simple way to sort of think outside the box. I really do appreciate that one.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Anyone else want to share a visualization you came up with? Don't make Kelly stand alone or fly alone.
Come on, Martin, you know you want to.
So I'll set the timer for another minute and wait to see who responds first.
Don't make it just me.
I mean, you don't have to. One thing to think about is if you at least have the symbol, like the eagle or a dragon, that it can be a useful reference point because you're thinking of that for some reason. So, does anybody just want to share a symbol? Some of the symbols I've had shared in the past, some people like flowers, the concept of flowers blooming, the idea of a labyrinth or a maze of some sort. They're slightly different, but they're similar in terms of your navigating. You're going with a combination of where you want to go and where other people want to go. I've had people talk about visualizations, like maybe a particular vacation that they went on, and they really liked visiting a castle, or they really liked visiting a garden. Well, what was it about that? So you can use those kinds of things to come up with a symbol. And then once you have the symbol, anytime you feel stuck or anytime that you're not sure what you need to do, you can think, well, what would I do if I was walking through that garden? What would I do if I was an eagle? What would I do if I were, feeling how I felt when I had that experience, whatever it might have been? Anyone else want to share any thoughts about the experience? I know this is different than, getting the fire hose of information about some very deep technical details. So I get it. It can be uncomfortable. All right, I am going to move forward here. So for a lot of people, the things that we talk about is that I'm no longer the expert. I spent a lot of time in therapy and with various coaches when I started coaching, saying, but I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not the expert. And then I had to move forward anyway. You're constantly having to rebuild and renegotiate relationships. And as an introvert, that's really hard for me. It takes a lot of effort, but it's essential when you make a change. If something in your life changes, something in your power dynamics change. So when you get a promotion or when you have been through a layoff, I got laid off from Microsoft in 2014 and for whatever reason went back just a few months later. Not necessarily the wisest decision, but it's what I did. I had to go back and rebuild the relationships I had before. I had to rebuild relationships with my whole team because I went back to the same team. But everything was different. It wasn't the same. And it was partly because things had changed in those months, but it was largely because I had changed and I had to rebuild how I showed up. So you have to be intentional about that. Create new communities, join new communities. Don't just go after the same groups of people. Find people that are doing hobbies that you like. Find people that are just in general acting very differently. Like this presentation, for example, is probably for most of you very different than what you get a lot of the time. Spend your more of your time in environments where the whole experience is different than what you're used to or comfortable with. A lot of times there's more ambiguity if you've moved up in the structure or just if you don't know as much about what you're doing and you may not understand the reward criteria. What's the criteria to get promoted, to get a great review, to get the next client to pay me even more than this client paid me, whatever it might be. And just everything about how you're looking at the world as an eagle or as a dragon or the flower blooming on the ground, you're going to have a different perspective. The landscape might have changed. Maybe the flower, you as a flower, are now planted at the top of a mountain, whereas before you were planted at the base of a mountain and things look very different. And so you need to adjust. What can I see now? I can't move back to where I was before. Given where I'm at now, what can I see? What do I want to do? What are my options? One of the things that I experienced my last couple of years at Microsoft and for a couple of years after was tunnel vision. I had depression. Severely impaired executive function is what my therapist wrote on a piece of paper when I first went on leave, which really shook me to the core. Because I've always identified myself as a very smart person. And I felt like she was saying I was no longer smart, which is not what she was saying, but that's the side effect of depression. You take things in a very negative light. But I kept thinking I only had one option or at most two options. And the more therapy I got, the more I was able to step back and say, wait, no, I have 10 options. No, I have 15 options. Wait, there are all these people here willing to help me, but I couldn't see them or I couldn't take the help that was offered. So that's where you need to recognize your perspective can change. and that you can add tools to your toolkit. And the tools can be ways of being, it can be things like meditation or new actual technical tools, AI, things like that. And it can also be the questions that you're asking the people or the way you form relationships with people. All right, and so that's where you need a Monday toolkit, like I mentioned earlier. So the general categories, and I've spent a lot of time on the prior things, so we may not get through all of these in detail, but in general, we're going to cover these 7 topics, with the last one being boundaries. I have an entire hour-long boundaries workshop and a longer version as well, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on that. But the rest of them we'll at least be able to touch on. So let's start going through those. One thing is that we're taught, especially my experience, at least in the tech industry, was very much about jumping to judgment. Bias towards action was a competency. I don't remember if that was the exact wording that was in the Microsoft competencies, but it was like, are you ready to take in the least amount of information you can possibly take and then jump right to a decision, and then you start making judgments. You know, the people who aren't on board don't have a growth mindset. The people who aren't on board aren't team players. The people who aren't on board those are all judgments. And that can also increase our own inner critic. I have always had a very strong inner critic. And so quite often when our inner critic is yelling at us, we then turn around and yell at other people. And so the way to deal with that is to say, oh, I recognize my inner critic is saying, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're not, whatever it is. So you're not technical enough is something that women hear a lot in the tech industry. So every time somebody would say directly or indirectly that I wasn't technical enough, I would try to prove it by going out and creating some new demo, going out and reading an entire book on something when really all I needed to know were a couple of new buzzwords. And I was regularly finding out again that I already knew more than the people who were telling me that I wasn't technical enough, but my inner critic kept saying I wasn't smart enough, I wasn't technical enough. And so then the advice I was giving other people was on how to learn yet more, how to gather more information, how to appear smarter, because that was what my inner critic was telling me I needed to do. So what I've learned to do as a coach is to say, thank you. Let's listen to what else is going on. What are you really trying to tell me? So for this inner critic, and a lot of people have names. I'm not good at naming mine. I just inner critic. I'm very direct and very literal. So my inner critic, or some people might call it, Carol or Rover, whatever you call your inner critic. Hey, inner critic, thank you. So instead of fighting it or getting mad that you have an inner critic, thank you. And quite often that'll calm that sense or that anxiety or that instinct down. And then you can start saying to yourself, what is my inner critic really trying to say? Hey, inner critic, what are you trying to, usually it's protect me from? And then the inner critic can say, hey, I just don't want you to fail again. And then your self-aware ego is the psychology term for it, can say, thank you, inner critic, I've got it, I can deal with this, failure isn't the end of the world. And by that point, you've befriended the inner critic by saying thank you and by listening, and you've separated the signal that it's sending from the meaning that's being given, and then you're able to separate that from the action that you're taking. So like and you guys may have been expecting me to say, here, you need to have a 30, 60, 90 day plan. You may have been expecting me to say, you need to, figure out all these HR things. There's a gazillion people that will tell you that. I'm telling you right now that if you can make your curiosity take over when you feel judgment taking over, you will make a huge, huge step forward in dealing with being in a new situation, a new role. Because it really is about going back and saying, what do I really need to be good at? What do I really need to prove to anybody, to myself, to other people? Like when I joined the Windows team and they told me over and over again, this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. Like my boss would say, Cindy, you've been here more than 8 hours today. You need to go home. And I was like, what? I've never been on a tech team that sent me home after 8 hours. And my manager would say, no, we want you to be healthy all week. We want you to be healthy all year. We want you to be here for the next 10 years. We need you to go home now because you're not going to be healthy if you keep overworking. Like, me getting curious about what was going on my prior teams and saying, why do you expect me to work, 80 hours a week? What other environments could I be in where I'm not expected to do that? That would be a type of curiosity. But also, the time that one of my friends said to me, quit working 80 hours a week, work 35 hours a week. This was when I was on the SQL Cat team, the customer advisory team. And the way that the rest of the team looked at me when I stopped pouring all of my energy into doing every little thing, it got so much better because I got curious about what do I really need to be working on? What is the most impactful thing I could be working on? And I followed my friend's advice and tried to work only 35 hours a week. And I started getting comments of, oh my gosh, you're working so hard now. Oh my gosh, you're working on exactly the things we need you to work on, because I got curious about what needed to be done, as opposed to doing everything that was handed to me as if I had to do every action that was in front of me. So, any questions about curiosity and judgment? Relationships. I'd say this might be the number one thing that people neglect when you get a new role. It really is about the relationships with other people. And some of it is about power. So who has the real power on the team? Is it the admin? Is it that person down the hall that nobody ever goes to talk to? Is it that person that, before a big meeting, all of a sudden you start seeing all the supposedly important people stopping by that one person's office and asking them questions and trying to get them on their side before a meeting. And you're like, well, they don't even speak up. So some of it is paying attention to power dynamics. So again, getting curious. But really, it's about having relationships with people, because people are people. People are human. People deserve to be respected because they are human. And so you need to build and nurture relationships with people. And that really means that as you're in a different relationship, if you're a different power relationship, like now people that used to be your peers that used to report to the same manager as you, and now you're their manager or you're their manager's peer, you need to think about what needs to be different in my relationships with these people. Should I still be having lunch with them every day, or do I need to spread that out and have lunch with a wider variety of people so people don't feel like there's favoritism? Do I need to think about, now I might have to tell these people what to do, or that they have to change their timelines, or that they have to work over the weekend. I need to start planning in advance for what are the boundaries with these people. How am I respecting their boundaries? How am I allowing them to tell me what they really need out of their work relationships, their home life? Am I being open? So the things maybe you complained about when you were at that lower level, and I don't mean lower level with judgment, but in terms of a hierarchy within a organization. If you were complaining about something and now you have to do the thing you were complaining about, you have to think about how that's going to impact these people that you complained about this thing with all the time. So really think about how you're going to negotiate the relationships in a way that makes you feel good, makes you feel authentic. I'm a big fan of Radical Candor and Radical Respect by Kim Scott, that really talks about relationships as the key to how you get things done, how you have healthy organizations, how you have innovation. It's how you go about having diversity, equity, and inclusion that really creates additional profit for your company. Because if you have a wide variety of people on teams, that comes out about because you're curious about each person as an individual, as opposed to thinking about them as a group. You're thinking about how they interact, what they need as individuals, and then what they need in order to work with the rest of the group with that sense of good doogie. So remember, that was coming together as one for a shared purpose. So how do you get your team, whether it's a project team or a team you're managing or whatever it might be, how do you get people to come together with this sense of Gadoogie by treating them as individuals and truly respecting what they need, as opposed to just assuming they all have the same needs. Maybe everybody doesn't need to go home by 5. Maybe somebody needs to, not get to work until noon and then work till 8 or 9 at night because that's what they need for just their normal style, or because of some family issue, whatever it might be. Treat everyone as an individual. One thing that I talk with a lot of people about is they say, well, it's not authentic. It's not authentic for me, like as an introvert, it's not authentic for me to network. What really surprised me was the first time I came to visit Redmond when I still lived in Texas, so quite a ways away. And I came into Redmond, I was walking through the halls of Microsoft, and I enjoyed talking to all these people. And I was like, this isn't me. I'm not an extrovert. Why am I enjoying going down the hall and meeting people? And that was a turning point in my career, because now all of the PMs and quite a few of the developers knew who I was. I was working in SQL Server support in Texas. Very few of the support people had ever been to Redmond or met any of the people in person. This was before video calls were common. And so I just walked up and down the hall. If I had said it's not authentic of me to walk down the hall and network, who knows where I'd be in my career? Probably much lower paid, probably would have never become a speaker. Like, all of these things came about because I said I can grow into new ways of being authentic. I can add to my authentic style. It's not fixed. It is something that I can choose to grow, and then I'll have more choices, more perspectives. The dragon or the eagle or the flower now has more things that it can see, more places it can land, more places that it can grow from, and keep choosing new paths. So be very intentional about the types of relationships that you're building. And I say this in a way that don't make it pathological. Don't make it all about power dynamics. Be intentional about what you need, and also about what the people around you need authentically, not because you're trying to build an empire or something like that. Questions? All right, have a dragon wing. So a dragon wing being like a flight wing, here's my group when I go out and I'm going to do something in the world. So when I think about my Cherokee and Lenape or Delaware ancestors, they would go out in groups to go hunting or gathering. They cultivated the forests on the east coast of the United States. They were heavily cultivated when the colonizers landed, but the colonizers didn't recognize it because it wasn't plowed fields. But they went out together and they encouraged the mushrooms to grow in a certain area. They went out together and they encouraged certain types of vegetables to grow in certain areas. And then they had a whole bunch of leisure time together with their wing, or their, what I'm calling here a dragon wing. So their group of people. And so you need to think about, who is in your wing, who is there to give you unconditional support, who is there to help you with mental health and healing, who is there to help you with self-awareness, clarity, support, learning, mentoring, sponsoring. And you may or may not want to have a more formal, board of dragons or board of directors. So maybe a concept you've heard of before, where you have a personal board of directors. Like, here's somebody that I go to for this question. And maybe some people actually have convenings a few times a year where, they get everybody together, they make them dinner, or you go out somewhere and have, play golf, whatever your group thing is, and you all touch on, what you're there together to do. So if it's my board of dragons, I might say, okay, I've called you together today. I want your feedback. What do you guys all think about where I'm at personally, professionally, in my romantic life, in my friendships? Give me all the feedback, just like you might do at a board meeting. And, having those people, no matter how much you formalize it, that you go to on a regular basis and you can ask them questions, can be very important. And as you move into a new position, you might need to adjust who's in your dragon wing. And by the way, these don't have to be formal titles. Like, coach is a role. I happen to have a job title of coach, but you can have a coach who is somebody that's a friend. A lot of people in tech organizations now are trained to be some sort of coaching manager. So it's really somebody who's helping you by asking you questions as opposed to telling you what to do. Any questions on that? All right, I'm going to try to move pretty quickly through the rest of these. So say good things. So some people have a harder time about this than others. Women in particular are penalized when we brag. We're told we're too ambitious. You know, people laugh at us when we say things about ourselves. So it becomes even more important to find a way that both feels authentic to ourselves and sounds okay to other people when we brag about ourselves. So keep a brag book, whether you tell anybody else about it or not. Write down the things you've done, good, bad, indifferent. The recommendation I have is start with the impact. This week, month, year, you know, whatever level you're at, the impact I had, the impact I want to have is, and the actions I did to get there are. You might also list, here are all the actions I took that didn't have any impact at all. Now that I work for myself, I find myself doing that a lot. I do a bunch of actions and I realize I haven't thought through the impact of it because I don't have other people around me all the time pulling me in other directions. And so sometimes I can spend a couple of hours creating an image for a newsletter, for example, and I go, what am I doing? That should have been 10 minutes, right? So think about the impact you're having, the actions that you had, and then start developing a practice of telling other people about it. And if you're not comfortable with that, start bragging about other people first. Most likely they'll start bragging about you, especially if you've built good relationships with these people. And so now you can start bragging about other people. You know, this person on my team, they did this really great thing, and the impact it had is this, and they did it by, you know, A, B, and C. And over time, you'll get more comfortable with saying that about yourself as well. And so you can write an email to your manager or your client or whoever it might be that you need to give updates to. The impact I had this week is, the actions I did are. So you keep it for yourself first, and then you start sharing it with other people. You can ask other people to give you pep talks. They're doing it because they are there to help you. If the pep talks they're giving you aren't useful, tell them. Give them that feedback until it's the type of pep talk that is actually useful to you. And then work your way up to sharing the brags about yourself and other people to the people that matter the most, as far as maybe getting you the next job, the next client, the next promotion, the next reward, whatever it might be. Any questions on that? All right, this one, hardest thing for me, go slow. I went through an adaptive leadership training my last couple of years at Microsoft. It was not related to Microsoft. It's a organization here in Seattle. And my biggest learning was go slow. So much of the tech industry pushes us to just go out and do it all. And what do? You know, you haven't exercised in a while, or you go to your first class and you just give it all on your first try. You pull a muscle, you hurt yourself, you have an injury that derails you for months, right? So you need to build your muscles slowly. And that applies to your new job, that applies to whatever you're doing. You know, when I went to the Windows team and I said, you know, how long are you going to give me before you expect me to know all the acronyms, to be fully participating in meetings? And my manager looked at me and said, at least a year, right? Like, I had been at Microsoft at that point for 17 years, just not on the Windows team. And he just flat out said, go slow. Don't try to show up in your first meeting and show that you've already figured it all out. Like the acronyms, and it was amazing the number of acronyms. People would throw something out and I go, you mean, you know, what it used to mean in the SQL Server world? And they go, oh, no. Over here, the acronym means something totally different, right? I was working on FPGAs. It's like, what the heck's an FPGA, right? Which now you all will know is, you know, what used to be video cards that drive the AI technology. So build those muscles slowly, but keep building them. Keep going to your workouts. Get curious about where things are ambiguous, but don't dwell in it. Don't get into analysis paralysis. Take small steps, but keep taking steps. Even if the steps are sideways or backwards, keep taking steps. Be okay with failures. Failures are inevitable. They're learning experiences. And make sure you're filling your cup. So as you're leading other people, whether with a formal title or not, whether you've got clients because you're a consultant, whether you're an individual contributor, a manager of, however many people, you need to show that you are truly doing what you're telling other people to do. You need to do your mindfulness practices. You need to do, working reasonable, comfortable weeks and not overstraining yourself and your team. And you need to practice true self-care. And quite often self-care is pausing and finding positive things that are going on in your life. Pausing and saying, okay, I've already done all this stuff. Now I get to stop and evaluate what I need to be doing next, instead of just staying on this treadmill of I must do A and then B and then C and then D, and all of a sudden you're carrying the entire world on your back. And then practice boundaries. So I don't think we're going to have time to go into boundaries. And like I said, I've got an entire 1-hour workshop on this. If you want to download the workbook, which has a couple of exercises, it's on the learn page of my website, befriendingdragons.com/learn. And you really want to learn how to set boundaries for yourself. Boundaries are not for other people. They're for you. And when you come at it from that mindset, it completely changes how you set and enforce boundaries. And then you also have group working agreements or community agreements, like the Gadoogie that I mentioned earlier, that come together as one for a shared purpose. And really make sure that you're doing a comfortable work week for you within the constraints of your life and your lived experience. So summarize, stay curious. That's more important than being judgmental all the time. Nurture relationships. Form a dragon wing, or all the people that surround you so you have support. Have brag books and pep talks on a regular basis. Build your muscles slowly, fill your cup, and practice boundaries. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you, Cindy. Like you've mentioned, this is a lot of things to take in, which are completely different and probably outside of the comfort zone of people on this call on what you would normally consider even thinking about.
Yep.
And so I kind of equate it back to when I first started presenting many years ago. And one of the things that Kelly said about you think about it, that it is that taking that first step is a scary step. And this is probably 30 plus years ago. The first time that I went abseiling. When you're abseiling, you're standing up on top, you're all harnessed in, everything is all good, you are safe. And you have to, like, you're standing here and you need to just let yourself go back to be in that where you're basically horizontal to the ground. So, and then you're walking down and going past that, I'll use a SQL term, going past that tipping point is probably the hardest point. And there's things in this session that I think people will find that is the tipping point on how do I get past that? Can I actually have that control that if I just let this happen, I'm not actually nothing's going to actually bad happen to me. And I'll get past it and just realize I can actually do this. And I think there's a lot in here that you can equate and take that on board and bring it into what you normally do from a day-to-day point of view that can help. So
yeah, thank you.
I
Yeah,
know
and
we
I
had
think
a few people join late, so for those of you who did, this session is being recorded and you will be able to rewatch the entire thing. So, but if you do have any questions after joining late, feel free to add them here. Sorry for cutting you off, Cindy. I just wanted to let those people know.
yeah. And for those who were here, well, for anybody, if you feel free to tell me what you're going to take with you on your journey, whether you were here for the whole thing or not. Either unmute yourself or type in the chat. And I want to go back to the two requests we had. So, Warwick, you mentioned interviewing as a consultant. I don't know how, I know I didn't directly cover that, but I did talk a little bit about dealing with clients as opposed to direct reports. What else do you have about that? What other questions?
So I think I look at it from I don't have a CV as such. I have a profile. If you're wanting to, you can find anything professionally out about me on that. And then I guess every time I talk to a client and, you know, you're having to impress them with, should you hire me? Can I do the job? And so I've sort of shifted my approach from not having a CV and everything. Here's a profile. Here is things that I'm able to do, and you're able to ask me anything you want, and you either make a decision that you want to hire me or not. Can that be a school of hard knocks? Definitely. I guess a bit like speaking. Sometimes we need to have some thick skin because we're going to have some knocks from that. And this is just I like how you put it in there about a Monday toolkit. This is another tool at your disposal to grow professionally while not growing technically.
And I think that drive to constantly be learning the next technical thing, I mean, it comes about because the technology is changing so fast. There's just constantly something new that you need to be learning and exhibiting expertise in. But the thing is that if you aren't spending time on what often are called the soft skills, you're not doing the hardest part of the work. Because my experience, at least, is learning the next technology once you know the first one. I mean, sure, it takes a lot of work, but it's something you know how to do. The hard work, the rewarding work is building relationships. It's figuring out the psychology behind why decisions were made. It's quite interesting to think about those things. And it's actually, when you hear about whatever 80-90% of people get jobs by networking, for example, whatever the number is these days, that doesn't mean you walk into a meeting full of people you don't know and you walk up and hand them your resume. That's talking about building relationships. It's about, finding connections. It's about caring about other humans as humans. It's about treating people as whole, capable, resourceful, and creative. It's about getting curious about them. So when I get nervous, I still go into networking events and I start rattling off, here's what I do, here are my credentials, here's my blah, blah, blah. But where I actually make connections is when I give a 1 or 2 word answer to their question about what do you do, and then I ask them a question. That's when I make a connection, when I go back into curiosity. So, it really is about doing the unfamiliar, uncomfortable things, because those are actually the hard things that are, I don't know a single person that made it to a higher level at Microsoft without practicing a lot of these skills. They didn't always do it ethically. They didn't always do it in a way that I would ever want to emulate. But they all were using these skills in some way. And I'm not saying all of them were unethical. Many of them did it in very ethical ways. But you need to figure out what you think is the way to do it learn from those people by getting curious with them, adapt it to yourself, and then move on.
So we've got a question from Ashok. Is there any guideline or framework to follow? I guess it is more a common sense approach to go one step at a time.
Yeah, and I think one thing to think about is maybe start journaling about things. And I know when I was still in tech, I didn't journal, and honestly, I don't journal regularly now. But whatever practice you have of thinking about things, like a lot of times, I will just turn on the auto transcript, the thing that's joined today to auto transcribe the session, and I'll just start talking into it. And that's my form of journaling. It doesn't have to be on paper. And so you could take these things here that are listed in the Monday toolkit. So maybe for this month, every Thursday afternoon, whatever's a good time for you, you journal in whatever way is comfortable about how you can stay curious with less judgment. And then next month, you journal about nurturing relationships. And so as you journal, as you go through it and you start finding the common themes and the patterns, you start talking about it with other people, and then you start coming up with action. So the framework in this sort of work is more about changing your mindset, and that requires first being aware of what's going on, then getting some clarity on what you want to be going on, and then only at the end moving into action. Whereas, especially in the tech world, but the corporate world in general, we tend to go to action as fast as we can. So the framework or the guideline is really about slowing down and doing it with other people. So if you have friends that are good at this, great. Hire a coach. I'm a coach. Like what you're doing when you're paying somebody to do this work is you're finding somebody who's truly impartial and hopefully has been trained. Like I was trained by International Coaching Federation. That's global. Some countries have other frameworks. Like find out where people have gotten their training, where they've gotten certifications. And just like in SQL Server, certifications have varying degrees of usefulness, but there's a certain amount of competency. And in the case of ICF, or the International Coaching Federation, there's an ethical standard we have to adhere to. We're agreeing to adhere to that. So when you're talking through these things, most of the coaches I know at some point are going to ask you to journal, because the framework or the guideline is exploring yourself and having somebody who can ask you the questions without judgment to help you explore and to get curious about yourself. That's the framework. It's not that there is a goal you're getting to. It's that you need to figure it out on your own. You are whole, capable, resourceful, and creative, which means I don't have the answer for you. Your friends don't have the answer for you. Your boss doesn't have the answer for you. And so find somebody, paid or not, who can ask you those non-judgmental, curious questions about the things you want a framework for. That's the framework. Ashok, does that help?
Yes, thank you very much. Like Warwick, I have been in the tech world for a very long time, and now I'm in the consulting world. The approach which I have always tried to follow, in the beginning, it is very important, or it has been important for me to listen to the people and understand the expectations of the management or manager, what they really want. And then thereafter, I set up my own strategy. The path I would follow, of course, is consultation with my management and the people with whom I am working. So that's the way I'm able to set my goal and my path, and then I start moving forward. Listening to the people and expectations is very important in the consultancy world. Before I become myself judgmental, but definitely in any decision making, I make sure that the people around me, they know what I'm trying to do and what I'm going to be achieving. So that's the way I'm able to do whatever has been the expectations of the people or the purpose of my consultancy. So definitely your presentation really helped me to understand the kind of thinking that's required to do this kind of the work. Thank you very much, Cindy.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good way to look at it, as well as when you're doing consulting work, whether you're literally consulting or you're just doing technical work and trying to figure out what the user, the customer, whatever you call them, what they want out of the situation. Apply those skills to yourself. Most of the people I work with, at some point, and for some of them it is constantly, they'll say something, I'll go, wait a minute, do you mind if I reflect back to you what you just said about yourself? And I will say, here's what I heard you say. And they'll go, I didn't, oh, wow, I was talking about myself that way. So apply these same skills to yourself, like really listen to how you're talking to yourself, about yourself, and what are you really needing? So especially like when I was really, really depressed, and I was constantly trying to figure out what's my system, what's my tech stack, and all these coaches were looking at me going, it doesn't matter, just pick one. I'm like, no, it is the most vital importance. And then it took somebody saying to me, why does it matter whether you use coaching system A or coaching system B? They're the same price, they have pros and cons, they're not exactly the same. Do I choose Oracle or SQL Server? There's a whole list of pros and cons. There's no one right answer. When I really, with the help of a coach, started listening to myself, what I was looking for was certainty. What I was looking for was someone to get me out of the depression, and that wasn't going to happen. Like, it just took time, and it took a whole lot of therapy to get to that point. I was looking for a shortcut, and I wasn't finding it. So listen to yourself and apply those skills. So that was excellent. Thank you, Ashok.
Okay. Any other questions from anybody else who has joined today? Feel free to either put it in the chat or take yourself off of mute and take this opportunity to ask Cindy. While we do give you a couple of minutes from that, I'd like to say a big thank you to Cindy for giving up her time and coming along today and being able to provide this session, which, as we've mentioned, is a step outside of what our normal type of sessions that most of us would consider even coming along to. Very, very valuable. As I mentioned, is being recorded, so you can come back and watch this at any point in time. Make sure that you go to Cindy's website and get more information about this to help you on your professional growth. Okay, so while Ashok is writing, if we don't have any other questions, this is our last session for this year. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank everybody for being part of the group for the year. With the festive season quickly approaching, I do wish you all to have a fantastic and safe time over the festive season. Take that time to look after yourselves, have fun, spend time with friends and family, and come back and join us in the new year. If you do want to present a session next year, feel free to reach out to Martin or I. I think I need to check. Normally we have this open via Sessionize, so I need to check whether we're still open taking sessions or whether we need to reopen that. But always happy to take on speakers. It does not matter whether you are a first-time speaker or a seasoned speaker. We all start somewhere. We all have something to share and teach others about. So look forward to seeing you all back in 2025. Do you have anything to add, Martin?
No, that was good going, Warwick. Thanks a lot, Cindy. Very enjoyable content. Yeah, I think we do need to put out a new Sessionize, Warwick. I think we might have do them year by year. It'd be great to see any new speakers for the next year. Even if you want to speak a couple of months in the future, just reach out to myself and Warwick, and we'll get you any help or stuff that you need. But happy Christmas to everyone, and have a great new year, and we'll see you back in, I think February is our first one, isn't it, Warwick?
It probably will be at this stage, yes. So everybody have a fantastic time, stay safe, and we look forward to hosting you all again in 2025.
Cool.
Thanks,
Thank you
everybody.
very much.
Thanks
Have a
for
great
having
day.
me.
All right. Thanks, Cindy. Bye.